Welcome to the deep dive. We're absolutely thrilled to have you here with us today because we have a truly phenomenal mission for this session.
We really do.
Yeah, I mean, if you've ever found yourself just completely exhausted, desperately craving a good night's sleep, only to be, thwarted by the absolute worst hotel neighbors imaginable, then you are going to feel this one in your bones.
Oh, totally. It's such a universal feeling.
Right. So today we are exploring the opening chapters, the front matter, and the critical reception of a remarkably clever novel titled Something About You.
Which was written by Julie James.
Exactly. Published by Berkeley Sensation, that's a division of the Penguin Group, back in 2010.
It is a really phenomenal piece of source material to unpack. What we have in front of us is a pretty comprehensive stack. We've got the book's title page, the copyright information from 2010, a fascinating praise section from various literary critics, and a highly revealing dedication from the author.
That dedication is just gold.
It really is. And crucially, we have the first 4 chapters of the story. It gives us a microscopic look at how a writer can set the stage, lay down breadcrumbs, and completely upend a reader's expectations in just, a few dozen pages.
Okay, let's unpack this, because what we are going to do today is take you on a journey that transitions from something highly relatable, like a genuinely comedic, universally frustrating annoyance of having loud hotel neighbors, straight into a high-stakes, chilling murder mystery.
It shifts so fast.
It really does. We are talking about an intricate locked room-style puzzle involving an antagonistic FBI agent, a deeply principled federal prosecutor, and a powerful United States senator.
And what's fascinating here is how the narrative actually begins. It is a masterclass in grounding a suspenseful high-stakes story in everyday mundane reality.
Right. Before we even get to the first chapter, we absolutely have to look at that dedication you mentioned.
Yes, the author Julie James writes, and I'm quoting here, "To the jokers in the room next to me at the JW Marriott San Francisco, as you kept me awake with your antics, this is the book I wrote in my head."
I just love that so much. It is the ultimate writer's revenge.
Completely.
It immediately tells you that the inciting incident of this entire gripping thriller was born out of a real-world, deeply annoying experience. You can just picture the author wide awake in a hotel bed at 2 in the morning, staring at the ceiling thinking, I am going to write a murder mystery, and you people are going to be the victims.
It's brilliant. It grounds the story instantly, and it translates perfectly into the introduction of our protagonist, Cameron Lynde. Let's look closely at Cameron's situation, because the author uses these opening pages to really establish her credibility, her exhaustion, and her precise state of mind.
Right, she's not just a random tourist.
Exactly. Cameron is a 32-year-old assistant U.S. attorney for the Northern District of Illinois. Now, the author gives us a very specific set of circumstances for why a federal prosecutor is spending the night in a hotel located just 3 miles from her own home in Chicago.
Yeah, because usually, if you live in the city, you just sleep in your own bed.
You do, but Cameron is getting her hardwood floors refinished.
Oh, right. And her home improvement contractor told her she needs to stay off them for 24 hours to let the sealant dry.
So she decides to treat herself.
Yeah, she books a room at the luxurious Peninsula Hotel in Chicago. But it's not just about the floors, is it? I mean, the source material makes it incredibly clear that Cameron is running on absolute fumes. She has just finished a phenomenally grueling 3-month-long racketeering trial.
And we really shouldn't gloss over what a racketeering trial actually entails. The details of that trial are crucial for understanding her mental state when she checks into that hotel.
It wasn't a small case.
No, she was prosecuting 11 defendants simultaneously. These were individuals charged with organized criminal activities under IACO statutes. And we aren't talking about white-collar embezzlement or petty theft here. The charges she was dealing with included 7 murders and 3 attempted murders.
That is heavy. That is waking up every day for 90 days and looking at crime scene photos, cross-examining dangerous people, and carrying the weight of the victims' families on your shoulders.
Exactly. The text explicitly notes that the trial was mentally and physically exhausting for everyone involved. To prosecute 11 defendants in a coordinated syndicate requires a level of mental bandwidth and compartmentalization that leaves a person completely drained.
So when she walks into the Peninsula Hotel, she isn't looking for an adventure.
Not at all. She is looking for an oasis.
She just wants a little bit of luxury to wash away the grit of the courtroom. She wants a $195 massage.
Which is steep.
It is. And the text notes she internally admits that is incredibly overpriced, but she considers it fantastically rejuvenating and entirely necessary.
She deserves it.
She really does. She wants a tranquil night of uninterrupted sleep in a giant bed, and she wants to wake up to an overpriced buffet brunch where she can stuff herself with pastries to the point of regretting it. It's the ultimate treat-yourself weekend. She is literally praying to the Peninsula Hotel gods for a good night's sleep.
But as we know, the universe has a completely different plan for Cameron.
Oh boy, does it.
The hotel places her in room 1307, and in room 1308, which is uniquely situated as a corner room with no one on the other side of it, a couple is engaging in what the text bluntly describes as a sex marathon.
It is the absolute worst-case scenario when you are that tired. The author gives us a precise chronological breakdown of the night, which initially reads like a pure romantic comedy setup, but actually becomes a vital piece of forensic evidence later on.
Let's walk through that timeline.
Yeah, so put yourself in Cameron's shoes for a second. You've had your expensive massage, you're wrapped in a cream-down duvet, and at 1:30 in the morning, the moaning wakes you up.
And it doesn't stop.
No.
By 3:17 a.m., the situation has escalated dramatically. The wall banging and the squeaking mattresses have reached a fever pitch. It's at this point that Cameron's internal monologue really shines, highlighting the sheer absurdity of the situation.
It's so funny. She's lying there in a University of Michigan t-shirt and yoga pants, pulling a pillow tightly over her head. And she is forced to listen to the woman next door scream things like, "Such a big bad man, right there, oh yeah, right there, don't stop."
It's every cliche you can imagine.
It really is. What makes this section so engaging is how Cameron processes the annoyance. Her legal mind is exhausted, so she reverts to sarcastic coping mechanisms. She is silently pleading with this man through the drywall. She's like, "Dear Mr. Big and Bad, whatever the hell you're doing, don't you move from that spot until you get the job done."
She even starts analyzing the guy's stamina. She theorizes that Viagra simply must be involved, and she can't help but compare this guy's, frankly, impressive athletic endurance to a disappointing ex-boyfriend of hers named Jim.
Oh, Jim.
Yes, Jim.
Cliff.
He was a corporate wine buyer and an aspiring artist who wanted to find his way in the world, but, according to Cameron, apparently didn't know his way around the female anatomy.
It is such a relatable, humanizing moment for a character who, we just learned, puts away mobsters for a living. She's literally lying there in the dark, regretting her life choices, specifically regretting not just staying at her friend Colin's place.
Right, Colin. The text mentions she lived with him during her senior year of college, and he makes a remarkably good cheddar and tomato egg white omelet.
Which sounds great right about now.
Doesn't it? She reasons that while Colin's guest room wouldn't offer the Peninsula's luxury buffet, at least she would be unconscious right now. She's debating, calling the front desk, staring at the glowing red numbers on the clock, wondering if she really has to endure 4 hours of this performance.
Then, finally, salvation seems to arrive. Through the wall, she hears a loud, triumphant proclamation for the man next door. He yells, "Oh shit, I'm coming," which is followed by a loud smack, a deep groan, and then blessed, beautiful silence.
The sweet sound of nothing.
Exactly. Cameron is absolutely thrilled. She falls back onto the bed, thanking those Peninsula Hotel gods, and crawls deep under her duvet. As she starts to drift off, she hears the heavy exterior door to the room next door shut. She assumes the guy has left. The 5-star booty call has officially concluded.
She thinks she's finally safe to sleep, but the reprieve is incredibly short-lived. This is where the timeline becomes critically important.
Right.
At 4:08 a.m., just about 30 minutes after the man supposedly left, Cameron is shot completely awake by a massive, violent bam against the adjoining wall. The noises have resumed, but they are fundamentally different this time.
Yeah, first, she just thinks they're going for round 2, which is infuriating.
Yeah.
But she notes the sounds have changed. She describes it as muffled squealing, and the bed is slamming against the wall harder and louder than it ever did during the first 3 hours.
She has completely had enough.
She has. She grabs the hotel phone, dials guest services, and gets a man on the line. She notes he has this very polite, quasi-European accent, even though she suspects he's probably just from Wisconsin.
A nice little observation there.
Yeah, she essentially unloads on him. She says she doesn't want to be a jerk, but she has barely slept, the walls are paper thin, and the people next door are gearing up for round 20.
The guest services representative is perfectly trained. He is completely unfazed and promises to send hotel security up to the 13th floor right away. And this exact moment is where the story pivots sharply. It sheds the romantic comedy setup entirely and plunges straight into a thriller.
Because the moment Cameron hangs up the phone, the room next door goes completely deathly silent.
She immediately wonders if they heard her complaining through the thin walls. Did her phone call interrupt them? Then she hears the heavy exterior door to 1308 open.
And Cameron, driven by a mix of pure exhaustion, frustration, and undeniable curiosity, decides she wants to get a look at these people. She wants to see the faces of the sex fiends who ruined her night.
Which is such a natural reaction.
It is. She runs to her door, presses her eye against the glass, and looks through the people. Imagine being in that scenario. You're half asleep, braless in an oversized t-shirt, just wanting to glare at your noisy neighbors through a piece of distorted glass.
What's fascinating here is how the author uses a character's profession to drive the narrative forward. Cameron's training as a federal prosecutor implicitly kicks in, even in her groggy, highly frustrated state.
She doesn't just look at the man in the hallway.
No, she catalogs him. She instinctively gathers data. Through the fisheye lens of the peephole, she notes his height, 5'11" to 6 feet tall. His build medium, which she later accurately estimates at about 170 pounds. She details his clothing with incredible specificity. Jeans, a black corduroy blazer, and a gray hooded t-shirt.
And the most striking detail: he has the hood pulled up over his head while walking down a luxury hotel hallway indoors.
That's the key.
As he quickly crosses the hallway and pushes open the heavy door to the stairwell, something about the way he moves, his gait, strikes her as oddly familiar. But he disappears into the stairwell before her tired brain can place it.
Let's analyze that detail about the hood because it changes the entire context of the scene. Why would someone wear a gray hood pulled up while leaving a 5-star hotel room in the middle of the night?
Right, it doesn't make sense for a casual hookup.
It strongly suggests premeditation. He wasn't just a guy leaving an encounter, he was actively taking steps to conceal his identity. He likely knew there were security cameras in the hotel hallways and stairwells, and he was deliberately hiding his face from them.
Exactly. It's a massive red flag. But Cameron doesn't know she's in a thriller yet. She just thinks he's a cowardly married man fleeing the scene because he heard her call security, abandoning his partner to deal with the embarrassing fallout from the hotel management.
So she decides to stay at the peephole to watch the final act of this comedy.
Yeah, a few moments later, hotel security arrives. She sees two guys in suits, one shorter, one taller. They knock firmly on the door to 1308, announce themselves as security, and get absolutely no answer.
The shorter guy wonders aloud if the occupants are in the shower, but Cameron is listening closely to the wall, and she knows she doesn't hear any water running.
The security guards realize they have a potential issue and have to follow hotel protocol. The taller guard pulls out a master key card, cracks the door open, and calls out again. Still nothing.
So both men enter room 1308, disappearing from Cameron's view through the peephole. The hallway is empty. And then, a moment later, Cameron hears a shout clearly through the adjoining wall.
He yells, "Holy shit."
That is the moment the floor completely drops out from under the listener. The comedy evaporates into thin air.
One of the guards yells to his partner to try CPR while he calls 911. Cameron, hearing this, actually knows CPR. Her instinct to help overrides everything, and she throws her door open to assist.
But the shorter security guard runs out into the hallway, holds up his hand, and firmly orders her to step back into her room. The commotion is waking up the floor.
The hallway is now filling with other guests poking their heads out, murmuring, confused. The night manager of the hotel arrives in a crisp gray suit to try and keep people calm and corral them back into their rooms.
The scene culminates in a genuinely haunting visual. Paramedics arrive and quickly wheel a gurney out of room 1308. Cameron catches a quick, harrowing glimpse of the victim as they rush past.
It's a woman.
Yes. She has long red hair that fans out over the edge of the gurney, creating a stark, horrifying contrast to the crisp white sheet and the white hotel bathrobe she is wearing.
And she's not moving.
No, the paramedic is straddling her, aggressively pumping oxygen through a handheld mask, but the text makes it clear the woman is completely unresponsive. Her arms are limp. The manager then firmly escorts Cameron back into her room, essentially telling her, very politely but leaving no room for argument, that she isn't going anywhere until the police arrive.
Just take a second and imagine that sinking, horrifying realization in the pit of your stomach. You were just making sarcastic jokes in your head about Viagra and bad sex and ex-boyfriends. And now you realize with absolute clarity that you just live audio streamed a murder through a hotel wall.
It's terrifying.
Because let's look at that timeline again. The second round of noise at 4:08 a.m., the muffled squealing, the violent banging of the bed. What was actually happening there?
It is a chilling realization. The initial noises from 1:30 to 3:17 a.m. were clearly consensual acts. But when the man returned, or more likely, when a new man entered the room, the nature of the encounter changed entirely.
That 4:08 a.m. noise.
Yes, which Cameron specifically noted in her mental catalog lacked the ass slapping of the earlier session and was instead characterized by a desperate, muffled squealing. That was actually the sound of the victim fighting for her life.
Oh, man.
She was being suffocated. The killer was likely holding a pillow or the heavy hotel blanket over her face. As she struggled and kicked out in a desperate panic to breathe, her thrashing caused the bed to slam violently against the shared wall.
It is utterly terrifying. Cameron is now sequestered in her room. She's still wearing her yoga pants and a hastily thrown-on bra, sitting on the edge of the bed, processing the trauma of the fact that she lay there, annoyed, while a woman was brutally murdered just inches away from her head.
And this isolation sets the stage for one of the most tense, drawn-out standoffs in the book. Not with the killer, but with the police. She is stuck in that room for nearly 5 hours.
This brings us to the fascinating dynamic of the ensuing interrogation. The initial police response is handled by the Chicago Police Department, as you would expect for a local homicide.
Right. The detective assigned to Cameron is a middle-aged, balding, and extremely cranky veteran named Slonsky. Slonsky's approach to Cameron is textbook police work, but it's highly antagonistic. He takes her statement, but his eyes immediately zeroes in on a half-empty glass of wine sitting on her desk, left over from her room service dinner hours earlier.
It's such a classic cop move. He's looking at the wine glass, trying to determine if his sole eyewitness is reliable or if she's just an intoxicated, confused hotel guest who might be imagining things.
And Cameron immediately realizes what he's doing.
She does. She has to firmly convince him she isn't a raging alcoholic and that her observations are sharp. She tries to take control of the conversation. She notices he introduces himself as detective, not officer, so she asks if he's from homicide, trying to fish for information about the condition of the girl next door.
Slonsky doesn't give an inch. He just gives her this level, deadpan stare look. She actively wonders if he practices in the mirror and flatly tells her, "I'm the one asking the questions here."
Slonsky eventually leaves the room, telling her she needs to stay put due to unexpected developments in the case. He posts a uniformed guard at her door and explicitly tells her not to make any phone calls.
Cameron, feeling the walls closing in, even asks if she is considered a suspect. Slonsky gives a completely non-committal answer. So now she is trapped, isolated, operating on zero sleep, and incredibly frustrated by the lack of transparency.
Which leads to a fantastic, slightly surreal interaction with the young cop guarding her door, who she mentally dubs Officer Manboy.
Yes.
After hours of waiting, she opens the door, absolutely determined to get some answers. She decides to pull rank. She announces, with all the authority she could muster, that she is an Assistant U.S. attorney. But Officer Manboy totally derails her momentum with a completely unexpected question.
He looks at her and asks, "If you live in Chicago, what are you doing spending the night in a hotel?"
It's a great character moment. When she explains she's redoing her hardwood floors, he suddenly becomes incredibly animated and interested, not in the murder, but in her home improvement.
He tells her he's trying to find a good contractor to update his bathroom.
Yeah, he enthusiastically describes his current bathroom as having crazy black and white marble and gold fixtures, saying it looks like something straight out of the Playboy Mansion.
It's a brilliant bit of dialogue from the author that diffuses the immense tension of the murder momentarily. But Cameron, being a seasoned prosecutor, quickly realizes he might not just be a chatty young cop. He might be intentionally sidetracking her with bathroom talk because he was warned she would be difficult to handle.
She cuts through the chatter and demands to speak to whoever is currently in charge of the scene. And this is where Officer Manboy lets slip a crucial piece of information. He tells her that the FBI has taken over the investigation.
Cameron is completely thrown. If you're listening to this and you know anything about law enforcement jurisdictions, you know that the FBI does not normally step in to handle a random local homicide in a hotel room. That is strictly Chicago PD territory.
It's exactly. The involvement of the Federal Bureau of Investigation implies a federal nexus. It means the crime crosses state lines, involves federal property, involves a federal employee, or, as is often the case, ties into a much larger ongoing federal investigation, like organized crime or political corruption.
Cameron knows this, so her alarm bells are ringing. The young officer says he can't give her any details, but he mentions that the special agent in charge might actually know her. He adds, rather unhelpfully, that the agent said he felt bad for sticking the officer with her for so long.
This really stings Cameron's pride. She works with the FBI all the time in her role as a federal prosecutor. She considers herself a professional.
Good.
She didn't think anyone in the Bureau disliked her enough to openly badmouth her to a rookie Chicago beat cop.
She's furious.
She is. She tells the officer to go get this mysterious agent and tell him that the fussy, annoying woman in room 1307 is completely through being jerked around and wants him to wrap up his little power trip right now.
And that's exactly when a voice from the open doorway behind the officer says, "For as long as I ask you to, Mrs. Lynde." The text describes it as a low, smooth-as-velvet voice. Cameron turns around, and standing there, filling the doorway, is FBI Special Agent Jack Pallas.
And the air just gets sucked right out of the room.
Uh-huh.
The description the author gives of Jack is vital to understanding the energy he brings to the narrative.
Absolutely.
He is tall, dark, and scowling. He has these predatory brown eyes. He isn't just standing there. He is radiating a low, simmering, dangerous anger. The dynamic between Cameron and Jack is instantaneously, almost violently hostile.
Cameron doesn't even try to hide her absolute animosity. She looks at him and says, "Agent Pallas, I didn't realize you were back in town. How was Nevada?" And he coldly, sharply corrects her. "Nebraska."
She realizes in that moment that her terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day has just gotten about 50 times worse. Jack is wearing a standard-issue federal suit and tie this time, but Cameron notes he looks absolutely no less dangerous than the very first time she met him years ago.
She tries to assert her legal rights and asks for a lawyer. Jack completely dismisses her. He tells her she is a lawyer, and since she is currently designated as a person of interest in a federal investigation, she isn't entitled to outside counsel anyway.
Cameron decides she's not playing this game. She tries to call his bluff. She grabs her purse, squares her shoulders, and threatens to just walk right past him out the door. She tells him it was so nice catching up and delivers this parting shot. "I'm glad to see those 3 years in Nebraska didn't make you any less of an asshole."
But as she aggressively throws open the door to leave, she nearly collides with another man standing in the hall.
This new arrival is Agent Wilkins, Jack's partner. And Wilkins is positioned narratively as the complete and utter opposite of Jack.
He is a suave African-American man wearing a remarkably well-cut gray suit, flashing a knockout, disarming smile, and he's balancing a cardboard tray with 3 Starbucks cups.
He looks at the tense standoff and cheerfully asks what he missed. Cameron, still fuming, says she's storming out and that she just called Agent Pallas an asshole. Wilkins doesn't miss a beat. He just smiles wider and says, "Sounds like good times. Coffee."
It's such a great introduction. Wilkins is clearly playing the classic good cop routine to balance out Jack's extremely authentic bad cop energy, offering her regular coffee as a peace offering.
But underneath that brief moment of levity, there is a very serious, very dark undercurrent. Jack steps closer, towering over Cameron in the doorway, and says in a voice that is deadly serious, "You have no idea what I'm capable of."
Cameron internally kicks herself in that moment for wearing her flat gym shoes instead of her usual 3-inch courtroom heels. She feels completely outmatched, both physically and emotionally, by this imposing man who carries a federal badge, a gun, and who very clearly openly despises her.
This raises an incredibly important question for the listener. Why does he despise her so much? What could a federal prosecutor have possibly done to earn this level of venom from an FBI agent?
To understand this intense hatred, we have to rewind the clock. The narrative takes us into a flashback from 3 years ago, detailing a profound, systemic failure of justice. Let's delve deeply into the Martino case.
Yes, this is where the backstory really fleshes out the stakes. We learn about Rob Martin, also known on the streets as Roberto Marquino. He was widely known by both the Bureau and the U.S. Attorney's Office to be the ruthless head of one of the largest, most entrenched crime syndicates in Chicago.
The text outlines his reach. His organization controlled nearly 1/3 of all drug trafficking in the city. He laundered massive amounts of illicit money through a network of more than 20 sham corporations. And he maintained his power through routine extortion, bribery of public officials, and calculated murders.
He was a monster, insulated by layers of lieutenants and legal buffers. Getting actionable, prosecutable evidence on Martino himself was considered nearly impossible.
That is, until Special Agent Jack Pallas volunteered to go deep undercover, Jack sacrificed his life, his identity, and his safety for 2 grueling years, slowly infiltrating Martino's syndicate from the ground up, gathering evidence piece by piece.
But his cover was blown early before the final trap could be sprung.
And the extraction wasn't some quiet arrest, it was a bloodbath. Jack was cornered in an abandoned warehouse by 10 of Martino's heavily armed men who knew he was a federal agent. He literally had to fight his way out to survive.
He was shot in the right forearm, taking a bullet for the case.
By the time FBI backup finally breached the warehouse to extract him, Jack had already been forced to kill 8 of those men in self-defense. It was a deeply traumatic, highly lethal encounter.
When Cameron first met Jack 3 years ago, just days after that shootout, he walked into her office wearing a cast on his shattered arm. He was dressed in a navy t-shirt and jeans instead of a suit, looking exactly like the rugged, hardened kind of guy who gets chosen for highly dangerous undercover work.
At that time, Cameron was a rookie. She had only been a federal prosecutor for a year. She was absolutely thrilled and honored to be assigned this high-profile, slam-dunk case by her boss, the politically ambitious U.S. Attorney Silas Briggs.
But the narrative delivers a massive, gut-wrenching twist. Silas Briggs calls Cameron into his plush corner office late on a Friday afternoon, always a bad sign, and drops a complete bombshell on her. He is unilaterally deciding against filing any charges.
Not against the surviving men from the warehouse, not against Martino's lieutenants, and certainly not against Roberto Martino himself. Nobody is going to jail.
Cameron is fundamentally stunned. She can't process it. They have a mountain of hard evidence gathered by Jack over 2 years of risking his life.
She initially assumes Silas thinks she's just too inexperienced to handle a trial of this magnitude, having only been snatched away from a cushy private law firm a year prior.
She is so dedicated to the cause that she even offers to step down from the case entirely and let a senior prosecutor try it. She promises Silas she'll just mope dramatically at her desk for a few days, but she will work day and night to help get the new prosecutor up to speed. She just wants the bad guys to pay.
But Silas explains his reasoning. And if you're listening to this and you've ever dealt with a terrible, politically motivated boss, Silas Briggs is your absolute worst nightmare. He tells her that a massive RICO trial like this will inevitably escalate into a media circus. He calls it a potential black hole for the United States government.
He fears that the moment they declare open war on Martino in a courtroom, the syndicate will retaliate. Key witnesses will suddenly flip their testimonies, evidence will mysteriously disappear, or people will just end up dead. He is terrified of being 2 weeks into a highly publicized trial and having his entire case collapse because the witnesses are too terrified to take the stand.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this interaction perfectly, painfully encapsulates the structural friction that often exists between law enforcement agencies like the FBI and the prosecuting attorneys at the DOJ.
It really does.
The FBI agents risk life and limb in Jack's case, quite literally bleeding on the floor of a warehouse to gather the evidence. They view the world in terms of absolute right and wrong. But the U.S. Attorney's Office has a different mandate. They have to calculate the legal viability, the resource strain, and the political risk of taking a massive case to trial before a jury.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second, though. Is Silas entirely 100% wrong from a purely bureaucratic standpoint? If they go to trial, spend millions of taxpayer dollars, and Martino's men intimidate the jury or kill the witnesses, and Martino walks free with double jeopardy attached, hasn't Silas just wasted years of resources and made the DOJ look incredibly weak?
From a purely cynical risk management perspective, Silas is making a calculated bet. He explicitly dismisses Jack's massive contribution, pointing out that because Jack's cover was blown early, the evidentiary chain isn't as ironclad as they wanted.
That's true.
Silas admits to Cameron that if they press charges and fail to secure a conviction against a target as big as Martino, the political fallout lands squarely on his office, not on the FBI. But the ethical problem is that he is prioritizing his office's win-loss record and his own political standing over the moral imperative of taking down a dangerous, murderous crime syndicate. He is choosing the safe path over the right path.
And it is that exact cowardice that is privately deeply devastating to Cameron. We get a really profound deep dive into her personal motivations here, which makes her so much more than just a snappy rom-com protagonist.
You learn about her father.
Yes. We learn that her own father was a Chicago police officer. One late afternoon, back when Cameron was in her 4th year of private practice, making a very comfortable $250,000 salary at a prestigious firm, she got the call that breaks every cop family's heart. Her father had been shot to death by a drug dealer while responding to what should have been a routine, everyday domestic disturbance call.
That trauma completely shattered her world. The author describes her feeling emotionally gray for weeks, unable to find meaning in her lucrative corporate work. What finally brought her back to life, what gave her a renewed sense of purpose, was sitting in the back of a courtroom watching a simple, straightforward felon in possession of a firearm case United States versus Markovitz.
Seeing a federal prosecutor stand up and put a violent felon behind bars made her realize she could actively do something. She could use her brilliant legal mind to fight the exact kind of people who killed her father. She walked away from a $250,000 salary specifically to put monsters like Roberto Martino away.
So, sitting in that office, hearing Silas Briggs back down from a fight with a known killer is a fundamental betrayal of everything she stands for. She is thoroughly disgusted.
But, and this is the reality of being a junior employee,
Right.
she's only been at the U.S. Attorney's Office for a year. She has absolutely no political capital. She can't openly challenge the U.S. Attorney without instantly losing her job and her ability to prosecute any future cases.
And then Silas delivers the absolute final crushing blow. He looks at her and tells her that she has to be the one to break the news to the FBI.
Silas hides behind bureaucracy. He explicitly states that the office has a strict internal policy of not commenting on their decision-making processes to outside agencies. He looks at Cameron and says, I need you to be a team player on this.
He is deliberately forcing a first-year prosecutor to take the fall for his politically motivated, cowardly decision. He knows full well the absolute fury it will unleash from the FBI agents who bled for this case, and he uses Cameron as his human shield.
And the fallout is massive. When Cameron delivers the news, Jack doesn't just get mad. He goes completely nuclear. He doesn't keep his anger behind closed doors. He blasts Cameron and the U.S. Attorney's Office on local and national news for nearly a week. He calls them out publicly.
The experience is incredibly humiliating for Cameron, who has to stoically absorb the public hatred while secretly agreeing with him. But Jack's righteous anger has consequences. As a result of his insubordination and his public outbursts embarrassing the Bureau, the Department of Justice demands disciplinary action. Jack is punitively transferred out of Chicago and banished to a quiet field office in Nebraska for 3 years.
The author gives us a glimpse into Jack's mindset during that exile. As he reflects while driving later in the story, he was bored out of his absolute mind in Nebraska for 3 long years.
He was partnered with a guy who spoke an average of 6.3 words a day and had the personality of a doorknob. He had endless, quiet hours driving through cornfields with nothing to do but let his bitter resentment toward Cameron Lynde fester and grow. He truly believes she is a cowardly, career-climbing bureaucrat who let a crime boss walk free.
So let's bring it all back to the present day. We are back in that tense hotel room. Jack is standing across from the very woman he believes wrecked his career and insulted the memory of the men he killed in that warehouse.
And Cameron is standing across from the man who publicly humiliated her on television for a decision she fiercely opposed but was forced to own. The sexual tension and the deeply rooted mutual animosity between them are absolutely explosive. The air in that room is practically crackling.
Which brings us perfectly into the current investigation, where they are forced to work together. Jack and Wilkins finally start sharing some actual information with Cameron about the dead woman next door.
And let's be clear, they are mostly doing this because Wilkins is a reasonable human being and because their boss specifically ordered them to extend professional courtesy to a fellow federal employee, much to Jack's intense annoyance.
They sit down. Cameron clutches her regular coffee from Wilkins like a lifeline, and Jack starts laying out the hard facts of the crime scene. He explains that the Chicago Police Department found something highly unusual while sweeping room 1308.
Hidden carefully behind the television, angled perfectly across from the bed, they found a high-definition video camera.
Cameron's sharp legal mind immediately jumps to the best-case scenario for a prosecutor. Do you have the murder on tape?
But Jack shakes his head. The killer was lucky, or smart. The tape doesn't show the murder. It ran out of memory or stopped recording. It only shows what happened before the murder.
Cameron references the extremely raucous sex noises she heard through the wall for hours, dryly noting that it must be quite a tape. Jack grimly agrees, noting it is incredibly compromising, especially because the man starring on the tape is a high-profile, married United States senator.
Agent Wilkins pulls out a photograph from the crime scene file and hands it across the table to Cameron. She looks at it and immediately recognizes the face, Senator Bill Hodges.
Now let's look at how the author weaves real-world political stakes into the narrative. The source material names Senator Hodges as a prominent politician representing the state of Illinois for over 25 years.
Crucially, the text notes he was just recently appointed as the powerful chairman of the Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs. And just as a note on the text, we are simply relaying the factual plot points of this fictional book as they're written regarding the portrayal of this politician. We aren't endorsing any viewpoints or taking any political sides here.
Exactly. We're just following the clues the author laid out. Cameron looks at the photo and asks the most obvious, horrifying question. That wasn't the senator's wife she saw being wheeled out on the gurney, was it?
Jack confirms her suspicion. It wasn't his wife. The victim was a high-end, very expensive escort. The FBI had already moved fast. They pulled the escort service's dispatch records, which showed the senator had been seeing this specific woman regularly at various hotels for almost a year.
Cameron's prosecutor brain kicks into overdrive. She starts pacing the hotel room, working the scenario out loud. She immediately deduces that the hidden camera was part of a sophisticated blackmail plot.
Wilkins confirms her theory. He tells her that, having reviewed the footage, it is abundantly obvious that Senator Hodges had absolutely no clue he was being filmed. Jack, meanwhile, had been busy playing his classic bad cop routine, aggressively interrogating the senator in another room.
Wilkins jokes about this, saying that Jack likes to break out the bad cop routine with everyone, effectively utilizing his dark and glowering thing. Cameron peeks over at Jack, internally noting that glowering is actually a much more insightful, accurate description of his resting face than the generic term asshole she'd been using in her head for 3 years.
She even wonders briefly if the man ever smiles, before quickly reminding herself that she doesn't give a damn about his emotional range.
But the revelation about the blackmail tape sets up a massive, potentially catastrophic legal complication for the FBI. Jack points out the harsh reality of homicide investigations. Given the highly compromising content of the tape, Senator Hodges would normally be the Chicago Police Department's primary, #1 suspect.
He was in the locked room with the victim. He was engaging in illicit activities that could ruin his career. And he had a massive, glaring motive for murder if the escort suddenly revealed the blackmail threat and the situation went violently wrong.
Jack admits the local police probably would have arrested the sitting senator right then and there. They would have slapped cuffs on him and paraded him out of the Peninsula Hotel. But they didn't. Why? Because of Cameron. Jack storms over to her, aggressively shoves the glossy photograph of the senator in her face, and demands to know, cutting through all the sarcasm. Let's cut through the crap. The guy you saw leave the room through the peephole 5 minutes before hotel security found the girl dead. Is there any possibility, any chance at all, that it's this man?
This is where we get a brilliant piece of deductive reasoning from Cameron, based entirely on physical weight and spatial awareness. Earlier in the interrogation, Jack had aggressively pushed Cameron to estimate the fleeing suspect's weight. She struggled to give a number because estimating weight through a distorted fisheye peephole lens is incredibly difficult.
So Jack used the people in the room as physical reference points. He pointed out that he, Jack, weighs 185 pounds. He pointed to Wilkins, who has a leaner build, weighing 160 pounds. Looking at the two agents, Cameron confidently pegged the man she saw in the hallway right in the middle, at about 170 pounds.
Senator Hodges, on the other hand, is built very differently. Having seen him in the news, Cameron estimates the senator weighs at least 250 pounds, and she notes he is significantly shorter than the man she saw wearing the hood.
So she looks at the photograph of the senator, looks Jack dead in the eye, and says with absolute unwavering certainty, it's not him.
Jack steps away, absorbing the weight of her statement, and delivers an incredibly powerful line. He says, "Then Senator Hodges owes you one hell of a thank you, because your word is the absolute only thing keeping him from being arrested for murder right now."
So what does this all mean? It means Cameron, the very woman Jack despises more than anyone else in the world, the living symbol of his greatest professional failure and his 3 years of exile, is now the sole critical alibi keeping Jack's highest profile suspect from being wrongfully locked up in a media circus.
She is his most important witness. The irony is just absolutely delicious. They are chained to each other for the duration of this case.
And this revelation opens up a massive, thrilling avenue for speculation for you, the listener. If the senator didn't kill her, then who did? Cameron logically lays out the timeline for the agents. The senator meets the escort. They have their hours-long encounter. Cameron is still privately sticking to her Viagra theory, and then he leaves the room.
Roughly 20 minutes later, the mystery man in the corduroy jacket shows up. Jack confirms there is absolutely no sign of forced entering on the heavy hotel door, meaning the escort knew the murderer. She willingly opened the door and let him in. Then a violent struggle ensues, and he suffocates her, causing the bam that woke Cameron at 4:08 a.m.
But who is he? Why was he there? Did the escort set up the camera herself, acting alone to extort millions from the newly appointed chairman of the Senate Banking Committee? Or was she just a pawn, hired by a ruthless political rival looking to destroy the senator's career?
Or, taking it a step further, was she hired by a massive corporate entity looking for blackmail leverage over federal banking regulations? And did the killer murder her just to get his hands on the tape, completely failing to realize it was hidden cleverly behind the television? The stakes are absolutely astronomical. It's no longer just a hotel murder, it's a national security issue.
This takes us seamlessly into an analysis of the craft of the narrative itself and how brilliantly the author blends these genres. When we zoom out and look at the literary context provided in the source material, particularly the praise section at the front of the book, we see exactly why this specific novel works so effectively and why it garnered such critical acclaim.
The critics absolutely loved the tightrope walk Julie James performs here. We look at praise for her other books like Practice Makes Perfect and Just the Sexiest Man Alive, and it sets the stage for this. The Chicago Sun-Times specifically praised her sharp dialogue, which we see instantly in the biting banter between Cameron and Jack, and even in Cameron's internal monologue about the hotel gods.
The Sacramento Book Review highlighted the hilarious situations, clearly pointing to the painfully relatable comedy of the noisy neighbors. Booklist gave the novel a highly coveted starred review, specifically noting the author's deep credibility regarding the law and her absolute mastery at conveying the behind-the-scenes bureaucratic maneuvering of the justice system. And Publishers Weekly called her work effortlessly witty and romantic.
What the author does so well is expertly blend what one reviewer called an escapist fantasy and a romantic comedy with gritty, highly realistic legal and procedural elements. The transition in tone is incredibly smooth. Think about the emotional whiplash of these opening chapters.
We go from Cameron mentally complaining about a disappointing ex-boyfriend and dreaming about hotel buffets directly into the visceral, horrifying shock of hearing desperate CPR being performed on a dead body through a thin wall. It grounds the thriller elements in a world that feels completely real and lived in.
The world building is phenomenal. Berkeley Sensation, the publisher, clearly knows exactly what their audience wants. They deliver a highly sophisticated, contemporary urban setting where the romance and the suspense don't compete. They actively feed off each other.
One reviewer noted that the sexual tension between the leads is as explosive as dynamite. And it is explosive precisely because it isn't manufactured drama or a simple misunderstanding. It is built on a solid foundation of genuine, deep-seated professional conflict, ideological differences, and shared past trauma.
Exactly. Jack and Cameron aren't just bickering for the sake of fulfilling a romance trope. They actually represent two fundamentally different sides of the American justice system. Jack represents the visceral, idealized pursuit of truth on the streets. He bleeds for the case.
Cameron, tied to the bureaucracy of the U.S. Attorney's Office, represents the pragmatic, cautious, and often cynical reality of what it takes to actually secure a conviction in a courtroom. Their forced proximity in this hotel murder investigation forces them to stop hiding behind their resentments and actually confront those differences head-on.
As we start to wrap up this deep dive, let's remind you of the core takeaways from the brilliant opening of Something About You. These first 4 chapters give us an absolute masterclass in executing the forced proximity and enemies-to-lovers tropes, wrapping them tightly inside a high-stakes, politically charged, locked-room mystery.
It asks you, the listener, to consider how past professional betrayals and deep emotional wounds color our current judgments. Jack can barely look at Cameron without seeing the Martino failure in his dead informants, and Cameron has to deal with a man who publicly humiliated her, all while she harbors her own secret, devastating pain about the murder of her police officer father.
It creates a pressure cooker environment that perfectly sets the stage for incredible character growth and intense suspense. But before we sign off today, I want to leave you with one final, provocative thought to mull over. Something for you to explore on your own that builds logically on the terrifying events of these opening chapters.
Oh, I love these. I'm already stressed out for Cameron, but lay it on us.
I want you to really think about the killer's perspective for a moment. This is a man who was fully willing to violently murder a woman with his bare hands to protect a massive, likely politically explosive secret tied to a powerful U.S. senator.
Right.
As he fled that hotel room, walking quickly down the hall with his gray hood pulled up to hide from the security cameras, he knew 2 very important facts. First, he knew, because he heard the door open, that he was seen by someone looking through a peephole in the hallway. Second, he knew that someone in room 1307 had called the front desk to complain about the noise, which triggered the security guards arriving just minutes after he slipped into the stairwell.
Oh, wow. We'll put that together. He knows exactly which room called it in.
Exactly. To the FBI, Cameron is a hostile witness. But to the killer, Cameron isn't just a witness. She is a massive walking liability, a dangerous loose end. She heard the violent struggle through the wall. She can pinpoint the exact timeline of the murder, and she saw him leave. She can identify his build, his height, and his clothes.
So the question is,
How long until the killer realizes that the police don't have enough evidence inside room 1308 to catch him? And when he realizes that, how long until he stops worrying about the Chicago PD or the FBI and starts actively hunting the one woman who is looking through the peephole?
that is absolutely terrifying. She is sitting in that room arguing with Jack Pallas, thinking she's just a heavily annoyed hotel guest whose weekend was ruined, but she has a massive, deadly target squarely on her back. What an incredible, heart-pounding setup for a thriller. If you haven't read this book yet, you absolutely need to track down a copy. We want to warmly thank you for joining us on this deep dive into something about you. Keep reading, keep questioning everything, and we will catch you next time.